Hello, good morning. You've tuned into CNBC TV 18. You're watching Power Breakfast with me, Vinny Motiwala. Along with me is Vamakshi Dori as well. Vamakshi, very good morning to you. It's Friday, hoping for some relief coming in the market after the fall we saw yesterday.
Well, absolutely, Vinny. Yesterday, when you look at the fall, it was broad-based. It was across the market. We could see it in the mid-caps, we could see it in the small caps. But relatively, the broader indices, they outperformed the benchmark indices. And in fact, let's see what today's session holds for us.
Absolutely. Will be interesting to watch out for that. But on that note, let's get started with the top headlines for today. Coming in from the US markets, US equities ended flat as investors worry about high yields and a ballooning US deficit hitting the economy. The 30-year Treasury yield hit its highest since October 2023 after the House passed the tax bill.
Stocks in the Asia-Pacific region mostly open higher as investors assess a slew of economic data from the region. The GIFT Nifty is indicating a mildly positive start for the Indian market.
Crude oil prices slipped, weighed down by strong US dollar and the possibility that OPEC Plus will further increase the crude oil output. Gold prices also fall as investors booked profits after prices touched a two-week high.
ITC reports a mixed set of numbers. Revenue beats estimates while cigarette volume growth comes in line with expectations. While for Sun Pharma, it was an operationally in-line quarter, but the management commentary is likely to weigh.
And President Trump's standoff with Harvard University escalates as the administration blocks Harvard from enrolling foreign students. Existing overseas students are being forced to transfer to other schools or lose their legal status. Harvard is being held accountable for fostering violence, anti-Semitism, as well as pro-terrorist conduct from students on its campus. On that note, let's look at what the Asian markets are doing this morning. What we're seeing in terms of the handover or the opening that's coming in for the Asian market is a positive opening so far. Whether you look at the Nikkei, whether you look at the ASX 200, Hang Seng, Shanghai, all of them are managing to hold on to gains. Taiwan index, mild gain right now, 0.07%. But other than that, Hang Seng is holding on to 4/10% of gain there. Nikkei holding on to that 0.8% of gain, as well as ASX 200, 2/10 to 3/10% of gain. Outperformance is coming in from the Nikkei. Let's look at the Nifty implied open. How is that performing today? Because the handover that we're seeing from the Asian markets right now is a positive one, and Nifty implied open is up 30 points as of now. Slight bit of a positive bias is what we could watch out for, Vamakshi. But, that's not always been the case. Sometimes you see that opening coming in and then we see the fall. So that is something to watch out for.
Well, absolutely, Vinny. And let's just recap what happened in the US market then. Wall Street ended flat as investors continue to evaluate the effect of higher US Treasury yields on the economy. The S&P 500 closed just below the flat line, losing over 2 points, while the Dow Jones lost a little over 1 point. Both the S&P 500 and Dow Jones posted their third consecutive losing day. The Nasdaq Composite was the outlier though, rising about over 53 points.
Okay. And the 30-year Treasury bond yield touched a high of 5.161%, its highest level since October 2023. The rate on the 10-year Treasury note breached 4.6%, and the rates on both the Treasury ended the session off their highs. Listen in to Kelsey Barrow of JP Morgan Asset Management talking about the volatility in the bond market and what it means for investors.
Bond market investors, their focus has really dramatically shifted over the last 2 weeks from trade wars to deficit wars. And the way that this deficit fear is playing out in the bond market is through steeper curves. The 2-year yield is actually unchanged, around 4%. That's the anchoring of the Fed and the Fed on hold. There's 2 things going on. One is the deficit. The deficit is a problem, but I think above and beyond that, it's the uncertainty around the path of the deficit. So I find it really challenging listening to these negotiations in the House, but knowing that the bill that the House is going to pass is not necessarily the bill that we're going to get at the end of the day, because it's going to the Senate next.
Well, let's also listen in to Mike Wilson, CIO and Chief U.S. Equity Strategist at Morgan Stanley, talking about the deficit concerns coming in due to the tax bill.
Let's be honest. I mean, the tariff announcement was a bit of a shock, and I think we priced in basically a mild recession at 4,800, and I'll stand by that. So, like, our call is not for a recession, but I don't think you can write it off. I don't think that's the concern right now. I think it's rates. I think it's this issue with the deficit getting bigger because of this tax bill. But what's encouraging is, I mean, we had a debt downgrade by Moody's last week. Then we have a tax bill passed, which basically blows out the deficit further. The bond market kind of wobbles a bit. The JGB market actually looks in more trouble, quite frankly. It's a global bond market. And yet equities closed, basically flat on the day today and barely down yesterday.
Okay, that's all the global market action that we have for you all this morning. But how are these overnight cues going to be impacting our Indian markets? We have a team of research joining in with us to set you up for trade, tell you which are the important stocks to watch out for in today's trading session. First up, let me go across to Vivek, who's here to tell us what are we expecting in terms of market cues, what should we be watching out for in today's trading session. Good morning, Vivek.
Well, good morning. Going into Friday with largely mixed cues. Remember, last couple of trading sessions, what we've actually seen is Gift Nifty indicating a positive start, but markets ending quite deeply in the red yesterday. In fact, now U.S. markets, like you've been mentioning since the start of the show, actually ensuring that it's a very mixed setup that they're going into it. The Nasdaq managed to end with gains, but yesterday, one particular sector that stood out as far as the U.S. market was concerned was the entire solar energy pack. This significantly fell. This on the back of the fact that the IRA that was proposed by erstwhile President Joe Biden now is under threat, and on the back of that, you may see some sentiment negative impact even across some of the Indian solar module makers. Now, along with that, have a look at the oil prices. Oil prices ended largely lower in trade. There are hopes that there could be higher production that could come across the next month. Brent near $64.50 a barrel mark. Indian markets yesterday largely fell in tandem with the weak handover from both global as well as Asian markets. FMCG, IT, Pharma were some of the top laggards. BS yesterday did take a sharp knock, just on account of the fact NSE, the SEBI is considering NSE's proposal to go ahead and shift its expiry date to Tuesday. What will react today to results? ITC Sun Pharma will be in focus. Even other names like Container Corporation will remain in focus. And sensex, remember, will have a new look very soon. You will see Bharat Electronics as coming into the sensex as well. And lastly, Asian markets, Gift Nifty, all indicating a mild gap up start for our markets.
Well, thank you so much for that, Vivek. Now over to Dia, who will now list out the stocks to watch out for in today's trading session. Good morning, Dia.
Well, good morning. Let's take a look at the stocks to keep your eye out on today. First, let's take a look at all of the earnings candidates. We have Sun Pharma reporting its Q4 numbers. Net profit has gone down by around 19% on a year-on-year basis, while EBITDA has seen an increase of around 22.4%. Margins have increased to 28.7% versus 25.3% in Q4 of last year. And remember, the company has also reported an exceptional loss of around 361.6 crores in this quarter. For ITC, the standalone revenue has gone up by around 9.5% over the previous year, but margins have contracted to 34.1% versus 37.1% in Q4 of last year. For Honasa Consumer, the net profit has seen a decline of almost 17.8% over the previous year, while the revenue has gone up by around 13%. Margins have also contracted to 5% versus 7% in Q4 of last year. For Gujarat State Petronet, net profit is sharply lower by 53.6% over the previous year. Even the EBITDA has gone down by around 41%, and margins have also contracted sharply to just 13.4% in this quarter versus 21.4% in Q4 of last year. For Metro Brands, net profit is down around 39% over the previous year. EBITDA, however, has gone up by around 24%, and margins have also expanded to around 30.7% versus 27.2% in Q4 of FY24 of FY25. Pardon me. For Grasim Industries, the net loss has narrowed to around 288 crores in this quarter versus a loss of around 441 crores in Q4 of last year. EBITDA has also gone down by around 58.1% over the previous year, and margins have also contracted by quite significantly to 2.5% versus 7.8% in Q4 of last year. For Concor, EBITDA has gone down by around 10%, while margins have come in at 23% versus 25.4% in Q4 of last year. And the board has also approved a bonus issue of 1 share for every 4 shares held of the company. For Ramco Cements, net profit and EBITDA have gone down by around 75% and 23% over the previous year, while margins have also contracted to 13.4% versus 15.6% in Q4 of last year. Shifting away from earnings, Adani Ports will be in focus. They are going to raise up to rupees 6,000 crores via the issuance of bonds. Ola Electric is also going to raise up to around rupees 1,700 crores via bonds. And TVS Motors has signed an MOU with OOR Cabs to deploy 500 electric 3-wheelers in Tamil Nadu. So keep your eye out on all of these stocks today.
Thank you so much for that, Riya. But let's go across to Mangalam, who's here to tell us what's going to be happening in the world of F&O. Mangalam, good morning.
Good morning. So yesterday was a bit of a sell-off that we saw on the Nifty, down almost 200 points. The Nifty Bank was lower as well, though we saw a smidge of a recovery in the last hour for the Nifty Bank, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. For the Nifty itself, a large part of that was on account of expiry. The street was working with an expiry range of around 24,600 to 24,800. It was at the lower end of the range. The Gift Nifty is indicating a mild green start, but the most important thing that I'll be watching out for today would be the dollar rupee, because the second half of trade yesterday we saw a sharp weakness in the rupee as against the dollar, moved a little over 86 as well, and that was telling you that there was some selling by the FIIs in the markets, and that's exactly what took place post-market as well. The data confirmed that 5,000 crore worth cash market selling. So earlier the FIIs sold 10,000 crore, then bought about 2,200 crore and went back to the selling ways in the cash market in yesterday's session itself. But not just cash market, they sold about 3,100 crores in index futures as well, where they unwound 7,000 longs and added about 10,650 shorts as well. So the net change was close to around 17,000 contracts, and that's reflected in their positioning as well. We were talking about how it was virtually unchanged at 42% and then moved to 37%. The FI longs have now dropped to 32%. So in just the last 5 sessions, it's dropped by 10 percentage points, and net contracts have more than doubled at negative 55,000 contracts. The important thing about Nifty Bank, it recovered from the lows yesterday and closed exactly at the 20-day moving average. So where the market goes today will be determined by where the Nifty Bank goes. 54,940 is where the Nifty Bank's 20-day moving average is, and where the Nifty Bank is as well. For the Nifty, key support would be about 100 points lower from where we are, 24,524, where the 20-day moving average comes in. Early to talk about next week's options, but the way the street is positioned, 24,600 call and 24,700 call, tells you that there could be some supply over 24,850 to between 24,900, but strong support seen around 24,400 to 24,500. The one stock I'm watching out for today is Dixon. We've spoken about the possibility of it entering F&O band yesterday, and that's exactly what's happened.
Well, thank you so much for that, Mangalam. But let's slip into a short break. Up next, we get you the fine print of ITC's and Sun Pharma's Q4 numbers. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Power Breakfast on CNBC TV 18. Now let's shift focus to some earnings that were posted post-market hours. Yesterday, we had ITC that reported a mixed quarter that came in Q4. Some misses and there were some hits as well. What is all of that? What are the details of the numbers? We have Mangalam here. Good morning.
Good morning. So ITC reported what would be a mixed set where there were some hits and some misses in the fourth quarter. So let's break it down. What's good, what's not. For starters, it was numbers reported ex their hotel demerger business. So you would have to adjust for that as well. The revenues coming in at 17,428 crores versus the street expectations of around 16,800 crores. So that was a bit of a hit. But at the same time, the cigarette volume growth coming in at 5% was also largely in line with expected, but at the higher end of expectations. What wasn't was the high inflation that we saw on raw material prices, and that as a result of which reflected on the company's EBITDA and the margins, both of which were below street expectations. Even the FMCG revenue that grew 3.7%, that's the lowest that we've seen in the last 8 or 9 quarters, as against street expectations of 6 to 8%, and the margin contraction was 270 basis points, the higher end of the street expected range of 200 to 300 basis points. Why is that happened? It's because of weak consumer sentiment. In fact, if you look at the cigarette volume growth, no problems out there, 5.5%, 5% out there. The FMCG margins, though, have been on a declining trend at 6.3%. What is it that the company said? They saw sharp escalation in key input materials. The FMCG business was particularly hurt by competition in notebooks. So if you take the notebooks business out, the FMCG revenue actually grew by 5.4%. Digital and modern trade now, they account for nearly a third of ITC sales. And the agri business, which saw nearly 18% revenue growth and 26% EBIT growth, was led by rice exports as they scaled up in the second half post easing of trading restrictions. Going forward, they expect progressive scale up in nicotine derivatives exports, so that would support their agri business as well. Paper business goes through cyclicality and it is at the lower end of the cycle, which is why we saw some weakness out there as well. All in all, some hits, some misses. The stock hasn't done much, trades at 23 times. So don't expect the street to sell these, sell on these numbers. But at the same time, nothing really to go ahead and buy on these numbers as well, which is why a mild green is what I see on ITC.
Well, thank you so much for that, Mangalam. Now moving on to Sun Pharma. It has reported an operationally in-line quarter, but the management commentary could weigh. Ikta joins us to tell us about how the numbers were. Ikta?
Thanks for that, morning. Well, I'll start with the management commentary because I think that's going to be the key important point for Sun Pharma this quarter. So they will be looking to invest $100 million in terms of additional costs on products. So there were a lot of questions in the conference call with regards to that. The company is also increasing its R&D spend to 6 to 8% of sales. So that could be an EBITDA concern going forward. Now, FY26 guidance, mid to high single digit top line growth, consolidated growth. And the company has said this is mainly because of global uncertainties. Remember, earlier guidance was high to low double digits. So that has come down to single digit top line consolidated growth. US sales $464 million versus estimates of over $500 million. Global specialty sales $295 million versus estimates of $310 to $315 million. Overall, in terms of numbers, like you mentioned, the margins were in line at around 28.7%, in fact better than estimates, and the profit was 2,154 crores with a revenue growth of around 8%, which was largely in line with estimates.
Okay, Ekta, thank you so much for that. Surely we'll keep an eye out on Sun Pharma as well as ITC on the back of the numbers. But on that note, we're going to slip into a very short break. And after the break, we get you what's happening in the world of commodities. So don't go anywhere.
Welcome back. You're watching Power Breakfast on CNBC TV 18. In a major escalation of its pressure campaign on Harvard University, the Trump administration has revoked the university's certification to enroll international students, citing national security concerns and alleged misconduct on campus. Here's a report.
U.S. President Donald Trump's administration on Thursday revoked Harvard University's ability to enroll international students and is forcing existing students from overseas to transfer to other schools or lose their legal status. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has ordered the university's Student and Exchange Visitor Program certification be terminated and accused Harvard of, quote, fostering violence, anti-Semitism, and coordinating with the Chinese Communist Party. Harvard rejected the allegations, calling the move unlawful. The clampdown on foreign students marks a significant escalation of the Trump administration's campaign against the elite Ivy League university in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which has emerged as one of Trump's most prominent institutional targets. The move comes after Harvard refused to provide information that Noem had previously demanded about some foreign student visa holders who attend the university, the department said. In the 2024-2025 school year, Harvard enrolled nearly 6,800 international students, amounting to 27% of its total enrollment, according to university statistics. Trump, a Republican, has undertaken an extraordinary effort to revamp private colleges and schools across the U.S. that he says foster anti-American, Marxist, and radical left ideologies. He has criticized Harvard in particular for hiring prominent Democrats to teaching or leadership positions. Trump has frozen some $3 billion in federal grants to Harvard in recent weeks, leading the university to sue to restore the funding.
Okay, that's an important update coming in there. But let's move on and get you the updates coming in the world of commodities. Manisha Gupta is here with us as always to tell us what we should be keeping an eye out on. Good morning, Manisha. What's on your list today?
Well, almost everything seems to be going in for some profit-taking right now. I'll start with crude oil prices, which are headed for a weekly decline. Well, this is because OPEC and allies have put out statements suggesting that you could be looking at further increase in output from them for a third straight month in the month of July. Well, there are now concerns of OPEC bringing more oil supply into a market, which is anyway looking at a lower demand. And in the meanwhile, you're also looking at increase in U.S. production, inventories, but the focus will clearly be on U.S.-Iran nuclear talks and potential threat of Israel's strike on Iran nuclear facilities. Having said that, we also have seen some profit-taking come in from metals. So gold is off its 3-week highs, silver is off its 7-week highs, and the copper prices also have come off its recent highs. The markets have seen, though, only one asset class continue to gain, and that has been Bitcoin. an all-time high yet again of $112,000 coming in for this one.
Well, thank you so much for that, Manisha. But viewers, that's all we have on this edition of Power Breakfast. From Winnie, me and everyone who put the show together, big thank you for tuning in. And don't go anywhere because Bazaar Morning Call comes up next.